was supposed to be just another quiet morning, but fate had different plans. When danger lurks and the unexpected strikes, one man refuses to back down. What happens next will leave you speechless. Watch till the end to see the shocking turn of events. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The city was still wrapped in the soft embrace of dawn when Jason Statham set out for his morning run. The streets were mostly empty, save for the occasional early riser or street vendor setting up shop. The cool air filled his lungs as his steady pace carried him through the quiet urban landscape. The rhythmic pounding of his sneakers against the pavement was a familiar comfort, a ritual that allowed him to clear his mind before the chaos of the day began. Jason had always valued discipline, and his training was as much a part of his identity as his name. Years of physical conditioning had turned his body into a finely tuned instrument of efficiency and control. He didn't push himself too hard, there was no need. His movements were measured, calculated, every step executed with precision. While the world knew him as a movie star, here in these quiet streets, he was just another man running before sunrise. As the run neared its end, he slowed his pace, adjusting his breathing. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the crisp morning air, drawing his attention to a small cafe nestled at the corner of a side street. He had never been here before, but the warm glow spilling from its windows and the inviting stillness of the place made it an easy choice. He wanted nothing more than a quiet moment to enjoy his coffee before the world fully woke up. Stepping inside, Jason took in the atmosphere. The cafe was sparsely occupied, a young couple whispering to each other by the window, an elderly man reading a newspaper in the far corner, and a girl no older than 11 seated near the counter with an open notebook and a few school books scattered in front of her. Her neatly pressed uniform suggested she was on her way to school, likely using the time to finish last-minute assignments. Jason made his way to the counter and ordered a black coffee, keeping his cap low and his presence unobtrusive. The last thing he wanted was unwanted attention. Finding a seat in the back, he took out his phone, scrolling through unread messages and news updates, blending into the background like any ordinary customer. For a few minutes, it was exactly what he had hoped for, quiet, peaceful, and uneventful. Then he felt it, a pair of eyes watching him. Glancing up subtly, he noticed the young girl stealing glances in his direction. Her curiosity was evident, but she hesitated as if unsure whether to approach him. Jason had seen this look before: recognition, uncertainty, excitement. He offered a small, reassuring nod, but she quickly looked down at her notebook, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Minutes later, she gathered her courage and stood up, walking toward him. Her hands clutching the notebook tightly, her voice was small and uncertain when she finally spoke. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Jason Statham?" Jason looked up from his phone, tilting his cap slightly. He leaned forward with a subtle smirk. "Me? Nah, I'm just a guy who likes coffee. But if I were Jason Statham, I'd ask you to keep that a secret, all right?" The girl giggled nervously, her face lighting up with a mixture of excitement and embarrassment. She nodded quickly. "Okay," she whispered before hurrying back to her seat. Jason chuckled to himself, shaking his head. It was a simple, innocent moment, one of the reasons he appreciated his fans despite valuing solitude. But just when he thought that was the end of it, the girl returned, this time with more determination. She held out her notebook and a pen, her hands trembling slightly. "If you're really not Jason Statham, that's okay," she said hesitantly. "But if you are, could I please have your autograph?" Jason smiled at her persistence, taking the notebook. He flipped to a blank page and, with careful precision, wrote his signature, adding a short message, "For the bravest girl I've met today." He handed the notebook back to her, watching as her eyes widened in disbelief and joy. "Thank you," she exclaimed, hugging the notebook to her chest. "Can we take a picture too, please?" Jason hesitated for a moment but then nodded. "All right, just one picture. But you have to promise me you won't tell anyone." She beamed, quickly pulling out her phone. They posed for a quick photo, and she thanked him profusely before hurrying back to her seat, staring at the autograph like it was the most precious thing in the world. Jason sipped his coffee, amused by the encounter. It was a good way to start the morning. For a while, everything was peaceful. The low hum of casual conversation, the soft clinking of cups against saucers, the faint music playing from the cafe speakers. The world outside was still slow to wake, and Jason allowed himself to sink into the moment, enjoying the temporary tranquility. Then the door swung open with a loud, jarring creak. The atmosphere shifted immediately. 5 men entered, their presence heavy and unmistakable. Leather jackets covered in patches, boots stomping against the tiled floor, tattoos winding up their arms. They were bikers, and the moment they stepped inside, the cafe's quiet ambience vanished. The young girl, still holding her notebook, froze in her seat. Her earlier joy faded, replaced with unease. Jason didn't react at first, merely observing them through the reflection in the cafe window. They scanned the room, their gazes sweeping over the customers before settling on him. One of them, a stocky man with fiery red hair, nudged his companion and pointed toward Jason. His voice was loud, obnoxious. "Hey, isn't that the big movie star? The one who thinks he's the toughest guy around." Laughter erupted from the group. Jason kept his expression unreadable, calmly taking another sip of his coffee, pretending not to hear them. The last thing he wanted was a confrontation. A taller, more muscular biker stepped closer. Well, he sneered. "Look who we've got here. Big tough fighter, huh? Bet you think you're a real hero." Jason slowly set his coffee down, his eyes lifted to meet theirs. His voice was even controlled. "I'm just here to enjoy my coffee, no trouble." But trouble had already found him. The bikers surrounded his table, their laughter growing louder, their taunts more pointed. The leader of the group, a man with a skull tattoo on his neck, leaned in close, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's the matter, Statham? You're not so tough without your cameras and stunt doubles, huh?" Before Jason could respond, a small but firm voice interrupted. "Leave him alone." The young girl had stood up, clutching her notebook tightly. Her expression was defiant, her voice unwavering despite the fear in her eyes. The bikers turned toward her, their amusement doubling. The wiry man with a scar across his cheek sneered. "Look at this little fangirl trying to protect her hero. That's cute." Another biker, a burly man with a cruel grin, reached for Jason's coffee cup. His fingers wrapped around it, and before anyone could react, he tilted it forward, spilling its contents onto the girl's uniform. The hot liquid seeped into the fabric, and her notebook slipped from her hands, landing in the growing puddle of coffee. She gasped, eyes welling with tears, not from the heat but from the sight of her ruined autograph. "Oops," the red-haired biker said mockingly. "Guess you should have kept your mouth shut, kid." The cafe fell silent, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air like a brewing storm. Jason exhaled slowly, his calm demeanor shifting. He stood up, his piercing gaze locking onto the red-haired biker. "That's enough," he said. The room held its breath. The bikers exchanged glances, their cocky grins faltering for the first time. Then the leader smirked. "Oh yeah, and what are you going to do about it?" Jason didn't answer immediately. He reached down, carefully picking up the girl's ruined notebook, placing it on a dry part of the table. Then he turned, facing them fully. The air changed, the storm was coming. The cafe, once filled with the soft hum of morning routine, now stood in uneasy silence. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The 5 bikers loomed over Jason's table, their presence suffocating. The young girl, her uniform stained with coffee, stood frozen, her lower lip trembling as she stared at her ruined notebook. The laughter from the bikers echoed through the small space, their cruel amusement making every other customer in the cafe shrink back into their seats. Jason remained still, his eyes locked on the red-haired biker who had spilled the coffee. His stance was relaxed, his shoulders loose, but there was an unmistakable shift in his aura. The trained eye would recognize it, the transition from passive to ready. The bikers, however, mistook his calm for hesitation. The leader of the memory of his earlier defeat still fresh. "You embarrassed us, old man," he growled. His voice was thick with anger, but underneath it, Jason could hear something else, hesitation. Jason tilted his head slightly, studying him. "You sure you want to do this?" The wiry biker pulled a heavy chain from his belt, let the metal links dangle with a clinking sound. He twirled it once, testing the weight. "Yeah," he sneered. "We do." The 2 bikers on motorcycles revved their engines, a not-so-subtle warning. The street had emptied. The pedestrians who had been walking along moments ago were now nowhere in sight. Whether out of instinct or simply knowing better, people had a way of avoiding trouble before it started. Jason was alone with them, no backup, no cameras recording. Just him and them. The wiry biker swung first, the chain lashing through the air, cutting toward Jason's midsection. He didn't move until the last second, then sidestepped effortlessly, his hand flashing out to catch the chain midair. The force of his grip stopped the momentum instantly. Before the biker could react, Jason yanked hard, pulling him forward into a brutal knee strike. The impact sent the biker gasping to the ground, clutching his ribs. The chain slipped from his grasp. Jason let it fall, stepping back as the man coughed, struggling to breathe. The burly biker rushed him next, his fists clenched like hammers, swinging wildly. Jason ducked under the first punch, fluidly shifting his weight. The second strike came just as fast, but Jason was faster. He deflected it with his forearm, then delivered a sharp elbow to the man's jaw. The biker staggered back, his balance thrown. He growled in frustration, reaching for the crowbar strapped to his motorcycle. Jason's gaze flicked to it. A weapon was always a sign of desperation. The biker brandished it, swinging in a wide arc, aiming for Jason's ribs. Jason grabbed a nearby trash can lid, raising it just in time. The crowbar struck metal, the impact vibrating up the biker's arms. Jason capitalized instantly, shoving forward with the lid, knocking the biker off balance. Then he delivered a kick straight to his chest. The force sent the man crashing against his own motorcycle, knocking it over with a loud clang. The first motorcycle accelerated toward him, the rider aiming to ram him using the sheer weight of the bike as a weapon. Jason waited until the last moment, then stepped aside with perfect timing. In the same motion, he grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground and swung it low. The pipe connected with the front wheel, sending the biker flying over the handlebars. He hit the pavement with a painful thud, rolling onto his side, groaning. The last biker skidded his motorcycle to a halt. He wasn't charging in recklessly like the others. He had a knife, a long serrated blade, its edge catching the morning light. He pointed it at Jason, his expression twisted with rage. "You think you're tough?" he spat. Jason exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You guys really don't know when to quit." The biker lunged, slashing the knife toward Jason's torso. Jason caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting sharply. The knife clattered to the pavement. With a precise movement, Jason drove his fist into the man's stomach, then grabbed him by the collar and flung him backward. The biker hit the ground hard, groaning in pain. Now there was silence. All four men were down. The street was still eerily quiet, but now a few people had gathered at a safe distance, phones out, cameras recording. Jason took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. The burly biker, still clutching his ribs, glared at him from the ground. "You'll regret this," he snarled. Jason walked up to him, standing over him, his voice calm. "I already do." The biker flinched. He knew he had lost. He scrambled to his feet, helping the wiry biker up as the others groaned in defeat. The fight had been swift, decisive. Jason adjusted his cap. "Now walk away." They hesitated, but they saw the onlookers, the cameras, the undeniable proof that they had been beaten again. The burly one spat on the ground, his hands shaking with fury, but he didn't say anything else. He just turned and limped toward his motorcycle. The others followed. Engines roared to life within moments, and they were gone, disappearing down the street like a fading storm. Jason exhaled, feeling the tension leave his body. He turned to the crowd. Some people were still staring, some murmuring. A young man approached hesitantly, his phone still recording. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and awe. "That was insane," he said. "You're like a real-life action hero." Jason gave him a small smile. "Just a guy trying to do the right thing." The young man nodded, still clearly in shock. He turned back to the others, the murmurs growing as people whispered amongst themselves. Jason took a moment to glance down at his knuckles. No cuts, no bruises. He had handled it efficiently like always, but something still felt unfinished. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from his assistant, a reminder about an upcoming meeting. Jason sighed, slipping the phone back into his pocket. There was always something, always more to do. As he turned and walked down the street, the echoes of the fight faded behind him. The bikers were gone, but he knew their kind. This wasn't over, not really. But for now, the city was safe, and that was enough. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the morning air like an impending storm. Jason Statham walked away from the cafe, his footsteps steady, his mind calm. But his instincts were already working. Something wasn't right. The bikers had been taken away by the police, but he knew men like that. They didn't let things go. Humiliation was a wound that festered, and revenge was the only cure they understood. He could feel it in the air, that lingering presence just out of sight. The streets were busier now, the city waking up properly. People moved with purpose, heading to work, lost in their routines. Jason blended into the flow, his cap pulled low, his hands in his jacket pockets. But he wasn't relaxed. His body was loose, ready. Every sense was tuned into the environment around him. He wasn't being paranoid. He had lived too long in a world where danger lurked in the quiet spaces. He turned a corner onto a less crowded street, a shortcut he had taken before. The alley that cut through the block was narrow, its brick walls weathered, a space most people ignored. Jason didn't ignore spaces like that. They were either escapes or traps. As he walked, his eyes flicked to the reflections in a nearby storefront window. Two figures shadowed him, keeping their distance but following. He kept his pace steady, making it look natural. But inside he was already calculating. He could hear the low hum of motorcycle engines somewhere close, not on the main road but nearby, idling. They were waiting for him to step out of sight of the public. They were patient, but so was he. Jason turned into the alley, his steps casual. But he was listening. The echoes of boots behind him, the slight change in air pressure when someone speeds up. He let them think they had him. The moment he reached the midpoint, he stopped. The air around him seemed to tighten. The city's distant noise faded. The two men stepped into the alley behind him. The wiry biker with tattooed arms and the burly one with the thick beard. The same two who had followed him earlier. They weren't grinning now. This wasn't for show anymore. Jason didn't turn around. "You boys sure you want to do this?" The wiry biker chuckled, pulling a chain from his belt, letting it dangle. "Oh, we're sure." The burly one cracked his knuckles. "You made us look like idiots." Jason finally turned, his gaze steady, his body still relaxed. "You did that on your own." The burly biker's face darkened and his muscles tensed. He was about to step forward when the low rumble of engines grew louder from the far end of the alley. Two motorcycles appeared. The riders were the same men from earlier, the ones who had tried to use their bikes as weapons. Now they had him boxed in a 4-on-1 ambush. Jason sighed, rolling his shoulders. Some people never learn. The wiry biker moved first, swinging the chain high, aiming for Jason's head. Jason stepped inside the arc of the swing, his left hand snapping up, catching the chain midair. He yanked hard, pulling the man off balance. A swift elbow to the jaw sent the wiry biker stumbling back, his grip on the chain loosening. Jason didn't let up. He twisted the chain around his forearm and drove a brutal punch into the biker's ribs, sending him crashing into the alley wall. The burly biker roared and charged, swinging a wild punch. Jason sidestepped smoothly, letting the force of the swing carry the man forward. Ward, as he stumbled past, Jason drove a sharp kick into the back of his knee, dropping him to the ground. Before the biker could recover, Jason grabbed the back of his head and slammed it into the brick wall. The impact left him dazed, groaning as he slumped against the ground. The two motorcycle riders revved their engines and accelerated, using the narrow alley to try and run him down. Jason moved before they reached full speed. He sprinted toward the first one, using the limited space to his advantage. At the last second, he leapt to the side, grabbing a metal trash can lid from the ground as the biker passed. Jason swung the lid like a shield, smashing it into the front wheel. The bike twisted violently, throwing the rider forward. He hit the pavement hard, rolling before coming to a painful stop. The second biker was already there, swinging a length of chain like a whip. Jason ducked low, the chain slicing through the air where his head had been moments ago. Before the biker could reset, Jason surged forward. He caught the man's wrist, twisting sharply. The biker let out a pained grunt as the chain slipped from his grasp. Jason followed up with a precise strike to the ribs, then another to the jaw. The man crumpled, hitting the pavement hard. The burly biker was next. He came in swinging fists, clenched like sledgehammers. Jason let the first punch sail past him, stepping into the man's space. A well-placed knee to the gut stole the biker's breath, and before he could recover, Jason delivered a powerful elbow to the side of his head. The impact sent the man staggering, dazed. The last biker wasn't as reckless. He moved slower, calculating, a knife glinting in his grip. The blade angled upward, a sign of experience. Jason watched him carefully, adjusting his stance. The biker lunged, the blade flashing. Jason deflected it with his forearm, redirecting the strike just enough to avoid the sharp edge. In the same motion, he grabbed the biker's wrist and twisted, forcing the knife loose. Before the biker could recover, Jason struck a sharp kick to the inside of his leg, sent him off balance, and a final brutal punch to the jaw finished it. The man collapsed, groaning. And just like that, it was over. Jason exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he looked around. The street was quiet again, save for the occasional bystander watching from a distance, too stunned to intervene. He glanced down at the four men sprawled across the pavement. None of them were getting up anytime soon. The burly biker, still clutching his ribs, glared at him. "You'll regret this," he snarled. Jason crouched slightly, his expression unreadable. "I already do." The biker flinched, but he didn't say anything else. He knew he had lost. They all did. The fight had been swift, decisive. Jason straightened, adjusting his jacket. "Now walk away." They hesitated, but there was no choice left. They saw the onlookers, the cameras recording from a distance. The proof of their defeat was undeniable. One by one, they dragged themselves up, limping toward their motorcycles. The burly one spat on the ground, his jaw clenched with fury, but he said nothing. Within moments, they were gone, engines roaring as they sped down the street, disappearing like a retreating storm. Jason let out a slow breath, feeling the tension drain from his muscles. He turned back toward the city, toward the normalcy that had barely noticed the chaos that had just unfolded. As he walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder, a meeting. There was always something. He took one last glance at the street behind him. The fight was over for now. But he knew their kind, and this wasn't the last time he'd have to remind the world why he was not the man to cross. The city moved on, oblivious to the fight that had just taken place. Jason Statham walked at a steady pace, his expression calm, his body loose, despite the adrenaline that still coursed through his veins. The bikers were gone, at least for now. He had given them their chance to walk away before, and they had refused. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Some lessons were learned the hard way. As he turned a corner, he spotted a small group of children playing hopscotch on the sidewalk. Among them, standing out immediately, was the young girl from the cafe. She was laughing, her earlier fear replaced with joy, as she enjoyed the simple act of being with her friends. The faint stains from the coffee on her uniform were still visible, but they didn't seem to bother her. It was as if the morning's events had only made her stronger. Jason slowed his pace, watching as she spoke animatedly to her friends. She held up the notebook he had given her, the cover slightly bent from how tightly she had been clutching it. One of the boys in the group, slightly older and wearing a red cap, stepped forward, looking at her with wide eyes. "You really met Jason Statham?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The girl nodded proudly. "I told you, and he signed my notebook." She held it up as proof, her face glowing with confidence. The other children gathered around, whispering amongst themselves, clearly impressed. One of the younger girls hesitated before speaking up. "Is it true? Did he really fight a bunch of bad guys before?" The girl could answer. Jason took a step forward, making his presence known. The children turned in unison, their eyes widening as they recognized him. There was a beat of silence, then an explosion of excited chatter. "Whoa, it's really him," the boy in the red cap gasped. Jason smiled slightly, giving the group a nod. "Hey there." The young girl beamed, stepping forward. "Mr. Statham, Jason, I was just telling them about you." Jason crouched slightly so that he was at eye level with her. "Is that so?" he said, amusement in his voice. "And what exactly were you telling them?" The girl held up her notebook again. "That you're the strongest person in the world, and that you saved me." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "I think you were pretty strong yourself back there." The boy in the red cap stepped forward again, his curiosity barely contained. "Is it true? Did you really take down all those guys by yourself?" Jason leaned back slightly, considering the question. "Well, I had a little help," he said, nodding toward the girl. "Sometimes standing up and saying something is the hardest part, and she nailed it." The other children turned to the girl with newfound admiration. She blushed slightly but stood taller, clearly proud of herself. A younger boy, no older than 8, asked, "Can you teach us how to fight bad guys too?" Jason smiled. The best way to fight bad guys is to not let them win in the first place. You don't have to throw punches to be strong. Sometimes just standing up for what's right is enough. The children nodded as if absorbing every word. The girl looked up at him, her expression turning thoughtful. Do you think I could be a hero someday? Jason studied her for a moment before answering. You already are. She frowned, confused. But I didn't do anything. Jason shook his head. Being a hero isn't about fighting. It's about helping people. It's about standing up for what's right, and you did that today. The girl's face brightened at his words. For the first time since the bikers had arrived at the cafe, she let out a small laugh. Thanks, Jason. I think I'll try to remember that. Good, Jason said with a small nod. And call me Jason. The children looked at her with newfound admiration. The boy in the red cap grinned. Wow, you really are lucky. I wish I had a hero like that. Jason stood, adjusting his cap. You don't need to be lucky, he said. You just need to be willing to do the right thing when it counts. The group of kids beamed at his words, clearly taking them to heart. The young girl clutched her notebook tightly, as if it now carried more meaning than just an autograph. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the wail of sirens. Jason's expression hardened slightly as he turned his head toward the noise. The events of the morning flashed through his mind. The bikers wouldn't give up easily, he knew that. But for now, the streets were quiet, the girl was safe, and that was enough. He looked back at her one last time. Take care of yourself, kid. She nodded enthusiastically. I will, and I'll make you proud. Jason grinned. You already have. With that, he turned and began walking down the street. The children waved as he left, their voices filled with excitement and admiration as he disappeared into the rhythm of the city. As he walked, he reflected on the events of the day. The fight with the bikers was just another challenge, another moment in a lifetime of standing up against injustice. But the real victory wasn't in the fight. It was in the girl's newfound confidence, in the way she had stood up for herself. Strength wasn't just about power, it was about knowing when to use it. It was about inspiring others to find their own. And as long as he could, he would continue to do just that. Sometimes strength isn't just about fighting, it's about standing up for what's right. But is this truly the end of the story, or just the beginning of something bigger? What just happened was only the beginning. Some battles are fought with fists, but the real fight is about standing up for what's right. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.